All right, so what we're looking at now is the general workflow around purchase orders, which is a new model that's still in the beta phase. We've built out a few new pieces to tie in with purchase orders. Specifically, we've added a lot of functionality to RFQs, to request for quotes, and we've added a whole new element called purchase requests, which are really just the building blocks of purchase orders. So generally how this works is you have the option of either creating a purchase request or an RFQ, and then turning that into a purchase order that's sent to the supplier. The supplier sends you the parts, you pay for it, and the parts get populated into your database. So that's one of the more complicated use cases. It is, however, entirely possible, and this is probably more common for smaller companies, to ignore RFQs and purchase requests and just use the purchase order form by itself. Okay, and this is the simplest use case you'll have with it. So how this works is a purchase order is created. It's kind of circulated internally, I suppose. And by that, I mean it gets transferred through several different statuses before, I guess, it's finalized. So this is kind of the potential flow you have there. It starts out, the purchase order starts out as a draft. It can get submitted to management for approval. Maybe management says, no, it's not quite there yet, send it back to draft, work on it. Eventually, when it's approved by management or approved by the purchasing manager or logistics, whoever it is, then it's sent to the supplier. The supplier or vendor sends you back the parts, says, okay, the purchase order is good, sends over the parts. And then when the order is fulfilled, a receipt is generated and you receive the parts into your live stock count in the software. Okay, so that's kind of how that looks. The purchase order is circulated internally, it's sent to the supplier eventually sends it back. When you receive the parts, a receipt is automatically generated, payment is made, and you receive the parts to your storeroom. All right, so we'll run through that use case in the software right now. Okay, again, ignoring RFQs, ignoring purchase requests, we're just going to go straight into the purchasing tab at the bottom, down to purchase orders, and create a brand new purchase order. Okay, now there are two main components to every purchase order. The first is the supplier. Obviously, you can't purchase anything unless you're buying it from someone. So that's generally the first part that you'd want to fill out. So I'll click Add a Supplier, which just brings me to the Shipping Receiving tab. And then I can choose a supplier from the list that I have here. In the system so far, I only have 3, Sanyo, Ericsson, and Grainger. I can add a 4th on the fly if I want. For now, we'll just use Grainger as the supplier. The address is automatically populated here. And that's good enough for now. So we'll just leave the supplier as Grainger. And the second piece is the individual line items, or the things that I want to purchase. All right, so this is typically parts and supplies, but the system can also handle tools and pieces of equipment. The only thing you can't buy really is locations, which makes sense. All right, so I'll go ahead and add the first part, clicking New. And basically what this does is it populates the purchase request form and then adds the request directly to the purchase order. All right, this will make more sense when we actually look at purchase requests. So for now, I'm just going to add a line item to the purchase order, select the part that I want. Let's say it's the gear rings in my system, and then how many I want. Okay. And it's pretty much that simple. You can capture more details if you want to. I've got a question here from Yogi. Can you add 2 vendors to a single purchase order request? No, you can't. So purchase orders are filtered by vendor. You can have 2 different purchase orders, one for Grainger and one for Ericsson, but you can't have 2 different vendors on the same purchase order. All right, so I'll add the gear rings to the purchase order, and then I'll go ahead and add something else. In this case, it'll be AAA batteries. And I've got additional information down here, which is 100% optional. You can choose to indicate whether or not production equipment is held up. So let's say you're waiting on the part, and in the meantime, it's holding up production. You can also choose to associate the purchase with an account or charge department. So an account would be something like the maintenance department, the development branch, like different sections of your company. So in this case, we'll pick the accounting department. Whereas a charge department is more like a physical location. And in fact, that's the only thing you can select for it. You can select the different locations you have in the software. So in this case, I only have two. I have the parts room in Miami and the spare parts room in Toronto. I only have two actual locations. Okay, again, optional. You can choose to associate it with work orders that are being held up or assets that are also being held up. Finally, you can set a required buy date. So I need this by the 20th, for instance. What this does is once I go past November 20th, the purchase order will be flagged as being overdue. Okay, and that information will show up in reports. I believe it also shows up on the dashboard. One of the KPIs in the dashboard is for how many overdue purchase orders you have. So this is the way that you set the due date. All right, so from here I can add more line items if I want. I think 2 is fine for now. A few of the other essential details that I need include the part number. All right, so I added the gear rings and added AAA batteries, and neither of these have a part number yet. Okay, but interesting thing here is when I add the part number to the gear rings, this will actually backfill the part number so that next time I don't have to do it. So what I mean is this. I just attached the part number to the gear rings for this purchase order. So now if I go to the Supplies tab and open up gear rings, okay, if I go to the business, I can see that the business asset number, also known as the part number, has been filled in. Okay, this was blank before I did the purchase order. Okay, so I'll just go back to the PO that I had. And I'll make sure to add the part number to the AAA batteries as well. Okay, the other two really important details are how much I'm paying for it, how much I want to pay for it rather, and the quantity. Okay, so if the unit price is unknown at this point, I'll have to generate an RFQ, and when I hear back from the supplier, then I can fill this in. But this is, it's not a guess, this is what you actually agreed upon with the supplier. Either they've emailed you and said this is the price, or it's displayed in their catalog, or it's a definitive piece of information. It's not a guess. All right, so there's a few other items I can attach to the purchase order. I can add any additional costs here. And the default that we have are just shipping and tax. So you can add an amount for shipping. What kind of shipping, air, ground, courier, or pickup. And then there is a tax amount for each item. So I can set the tax rate, let's say in Canada it's 13%. Okay, and the tax is calculated here and added to the total. If for whatever reason this tax rate doesn't apply, I can override that and say, okay, it's not going to be $9.75. There's some weird levy or weird tariff. So I'm going to override it and write it's actually going to be $25. All right. In addition to shipping and tax, I can add other miscellaneous costs or other additional costs by clicking New. Okay. And I don't actually have any set up yet. But if I go, it's telling me what to do here. If I go to my settings and then lookup tables, I can add other cost types beyond shipping and tax. Okay, and then I can add those to the purchase order. Okay. The general tab just has a trivial bit of information here. Again, I can attach an account or a charge department. This is for the purchase order itself, not the individual line items. So for instance, I can attach gear rings to a certain charge department and the purchase order itself to a different one. Okay, this tab is fairly trivial. I don't imagine too many people will use it. Okay, so the shipping and receiving tab. Again, the supplier is the most important bit I have there. I can also choose where I want the parts shipped to and billed to if the two happen to be different. For where it's shipped to, I have to select a facility in my CMMS. In this case, I'll choose the Toronto Parts Room. Okay, which I don't have an address entered for. If the billing location is different, or if I want to specify a different billing location, I have that option as well. Okay, I can say even though it's shipping to Toronto, I'm billing it to Miami, for instance. Okay, so under the Notifications tab, you see all the people that are receiving notifications concerning the purchase order. Okay, it works in a similar way to the Notifications tab on work orders. So by default, the logistics group and the purchasing group are added to every single purchase order. Okay, and there's actually no way to remove them. So if I delete the purchasing group, and I believe if I come back, it should show up right away. Okay, I might have to make a change and then it'll show up again. But either way, the purchasing group and logistics group are added by default, every single one. And then anyone who makes edits to the purchase order is also added. So I created the work order, or I created the purchase order and made changes to it, so I'm added. But let's say I populated someone's request onto the PO. Like let's say Jimmy submitted a purchase request, and I said, okay, that's good. I'm taking that request and adding it to this order. Jimmy would then be attached under the Notifications tab. Okay, so what this means is he would be notified when the status is changed. So let's say I then submitted this for approval or sent it to supplier. He would get notified when the parts come in. Basically, any notification concerning the purchase order, he gets. Okay, the Files tab I'm sure we're all familiar with. Just like with work orders and assets and pretty much everything, you can upload files from your computer and attach them to the purchase order. Okay, it's really more of a reference. So I can go here and add a picture from my hard drive that's now available in the purchase order. Okay, I don't imagine this is as useful as it is for assets or other things like that, since purchase orders are pretty temporary. The one thing I will point out with it is when the purchase order is sent, let's say this is emailed to Grainger, it's not going to also attach whatever files you upload. Okay, you get to see a preview of the email that's sent, and it doesn't include any of the files here. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, the discussion and the rest of these tabs we'll go through in a minute. Basically, I've finished building the purchase order, and now it's ready to get shuffled along in the process. Okay, so the first step, I can either submit for approval, or I can also bypass this step and send it directly to the supplier. So let's pretend that I'm kind of a lower level employee. I don't have the ability to just send it directly to the supplier. So I'm going to submit it to my manager for approval first. Okay, between different status changes, you'll often have the opportunity to attach a comment, which is entirely optional. Okay, Robert's asking, sometimes we submit a picture to the vendor to make sure we get the right part. So as I mentioned, anything you attach here isn't going to be included in the email. I believe that'll have to be sent separately. Either that, or we can discuss the possibility of including the files in emails that get sent. Okay, Robert, let's talk more about that after the webinar. Okay, so I submitted the status for approval. Or sorry, I submitted the work order for approval. Kind of the next phase is I would log in as a manager or administrator and say, okay, either make changes to this or, you know what, this purchase order looks good. I'm going to approve it. Okay, again, I have the opportunity to comment. Once it's approved, you again have, I believe, one last chance to make a few minor edits, and then you can send it to supplier. Sorry, not minor edits. You have one last chance to review it before it's sent to the supplier. Okay, so I click send to supplier. It gives me a preview of the email that will be sent. It includes all the details I've entered. And I've basically got two options. I can actually send the email, or I can just mark it as sent. Both of these will change the status to on order. If I just mark it as sent, it's not going to actually send the email. So the reason I might do this is say I'm going to fax it, or say I'm going to call it in. I don't need to also send them the email. I'm hoping I explained that correctly. So send the email will change the status and send an email. Mark as sent will just change the status. Okay, so in this case, I'll just mark it as sent. Okay, and I believe in this case, a comment is mandatory. Okay, so it's on order. And from here, it'll remain on order until the parts are actually received. Jim is asking, can the purchase order number be changed? Let's talk about that at the end. That's an advanced setting. Okay, so the purchase order has been sent, or at least marked as sent, and we're waiting to hear back from the supplier. So eventually, hopefully, the supplier gets back to us, ships us our parts, we've paid for them, and now we can finally close off the purchase order. Okay, so when I am closing, there is three options. I can either say mark it as fulfilled, yes, it came in, set to not fulfilled, which is for whatever reason the contract was broken, the supplier didn't send us the things we wanted, or we canceled the contract with them. And the final option is just cancel the purchase order. So if I want to make changes to it, like let's say I want to edit the details here, I'm not able to do this in the status that it's in. When something's on order, it's not going to let me edit the supplier or the ship to, where it ships to or who it bills to. So I'm going to have to take it back to draft stage by canceling it. Okay, so that's kind of the option there. In this case, however, we'll pretend that I did receive the parts from the supplier okay, and I'm going to fulfill the order normally. Okay, click OK. And it marks it as order fulfilled. So first of all, I'll check the activity log, and here's a full history of every status change that's been made, who made it, when they made it, and also any comments that were attached. Okay, Jim will go through that again in the next example. Jim's asking about closing the purchase order at the top. Okay, so the activity log will show a full history of every status change that's made. The discussion tab, these are individual comments that people can add themselves. So a manager might log in and say, are we still waiting for this part, or what's the deal with, right? And can just add to the conversation on the discussion tab. Okay, again, it'll show who submitted the comment and what time. Okay, so the order has been marked as fulfilled, which now gives us the opportunity to receive the items. All right, so while this was still on order, we weren't able to do this, but now that we've marked it as order fulfilled, these items kind of open up and we can receive the actual parts. Okay, so I'll check off all the different items I want to receive and say receive these items. Okay, the default is that I'll assume the order went perfectly. I wanted 5, they gave me 5. I wanted 4, they gave me 4. And I can just click receive and get this number. I can also change this and say, let's say they screwed up and only sent me 3. So I'm going to mark that down. All right. The other thing is that gear rings will automatically, I guess the default is that they're put in their existing location. Right now I have gear rings in the Toronto parts room. But I can either change this to a different location, or I can receive to multiple locations. I can put 3 in the parts room in Toronto and 2 in the Miami parts room. All right. For now, we'll keep it simple. I'll just receive the full amount for the gear rings and 4 AAA batteries and click receive. Okay, so that's updated here as well. I can see ordered 5, received 5, ordered 4, received 4, and how much I paid. All right, so very quickly, we'll head down to gear rings and just check out how that's reflected in the part itself. Okay, so first of all, a receipt was generated, okay, for 5 gear rings. And if I scroll down, I can also see the related purchase orders to it. So number 21, I can open that up and see, again, this is back to the purchase order we just did, but I can see how much I paid for it, who I ordered it from, etc. Okay, so that information is all available from looking at the gear rings as well. Okay, so that's kind of the simplest use case, just creating a brand new purchase order and then dealing only with that. It gets a little more complicated when you incorporate purchase requests or request for quotes. Okay, so purchase requests are typically made by people who don't have the ability to create a purchase order. Or if management doesn't want to deal with the item right away, they'll just create a request for it, and then at the end of the month when they're doing their purchasing, or at the end of the week, then they'll look back at all the requests they've made in the last couple of days and combine them into a purchase order. Okay, so purchase requests can be made in 2 ways. The first is manually generated by a user. So the user will go to their dashboard and click New Purchase Request and submit a request for a particular item. The other way to do it is to have purchase request generated automatically when parts are running low. So you can set up the gear rings to say every time I have less than 5 of these, generate a request for, to buy 4 more of them, for instance. Okay, for now we'll just deal with the first use case, which is generating them manually. So new requests go to the purchase planning board. We can see a full list of all the things in the system that have been requested. Like Jim wants to buy 10 more of these, Bob wants to buy 5 more of those. You can see the full list of everything that everyone wants to buy. And from here, you pick the ones you want, maybe edit the details on them, and add them to purchase orders. All right, pretty straightforward. From then, it's just the process that we saw. You circulate the purchase order internally. It goes through several different statuses, maybe on approval, sent to supplier, etc. It goes to the supplier. Supplier sends you back your goods. The receipt's generated, and the parts are populated into the storeroom. Okay, so really the only thing we've added on here is that we're generating purchase requests first, and those requests are getting added to the purchase orders. All right, so slightly more complicated use case. Okay, so we'll go through that now. There's a few different places you can generate purchase requests from. The first is the dashboard. So these 2 buttons have been added here where you can see my purchase requests, all the ones that you've submitted before, and the button here to actually submit a new one. Okay, so I'll click Submit Purchase Request. This form should look familiar. It's the same one you get when you add a line item to a purchase order. Okay, so I can either select a piece of equipment, a tool, or part that already exists in the system. So I open it up here and I see all the parts and tools and equipment that I have. And I can add, for instance, a widget and how many I want. Okay, so I created a request for 5 more widgets. The other thing I can do is, if we don't have the part in our system, like let's say I want to order something that doesn't exist yet, if I was a manager or an administrator, I would probably go down to the parts menu and create a new one anyways, or create a new one first. But if I'm just a technician and I don't have the ability to create new parts and supplies, I'm going to say, okay, I'll just describe the part that I want. Okay, so we need more nuts and bolts. How many of them? Say 5. Okay, as I mentioned before, you can see a full list of all the requests that you've created. In this case, it's quite a few. And then there are, I believe, 2 more places you can manually create requests. So the second place is on any work order. Okay, so I've just got a generic work order here. I can go to the top here and click Submit Purchase Request, which pulls up the exact same form, except it fills in these 2 details here where it says the work order that's impacted and also the asset that's impacted. Okay, so it just pulls this information from the work order. Okay. The last place I can do this is from the parts and supplies menu. So I have metal cables here. Instead of having to go to my dashboard and create a new purchase request and then select metal cable, it's a little bit faster to just go up here, click more, and the only option under there is to submit a purchase request. Okay, as you might guess, the metal cable is populated automatically. Okay, so again, the three places. On your dashboard, you have a submit purchase request. On any work order, you'll have the same, which will automatically fill in the details for the work order and the asset. And the last is from the parts menu as well. If I go to any part, I can submit a request for that part. Okay, so all of these requests get added to the purchase planning board, okay, which is filtered by different suppliers. So AAA batteries, for instance, already had an associated supplier when I created the request, so it was added under Sanyo. Okay, nuts and bolts, however, don't exist in the system and aren't actually associated with any supplier. So when I created a request for those, it just got filtered under, or it got kind of dumped under here, okay, where it needs to be associated with a supplier before it can be added to any purchase orders. Okay, so we looked at before how adding a part number to the part and supply also, I guess, backfills the data for that part. So next time I don't have to do this, it'll just automatically add this part number to the AAA batteries. Okay, it's the same with suppliers. So I have a window pane here that I created a request for, and there was no associated supplier on the part. So what I'll do is I'll say, okay, I'm going to select a supplier for the window pane, and in this case, I'll choose Ericsson. Okay, and click OK. So it gets moved under out of no man's land and placed under Ericsson, which is all good. And if I go to the window pane in the supplies tab, so prior to this, the businesses tab was empty, but it backfilled Ericsson as the business for window pane. So next time I create a request on window pane, it'll automatically associate it with Ericsson. Okay, in the event that there are multiple suppliers associated with the part, like let's say Grainger also makes a window pane you might want to buy. Here I can add Grainger as well. If I want to set a default, so just like next time there's a request for window pane, don't use Ericsson, use Grainger. All I need to do is select this as my preferred vendor. Okay, so the next request will automatically be filtered for Grainger. Okay, as you might expect this to work. All right, so from here, let's say I'm going to take the window pane and I want to add it to a purchase order, but I need to get some of the details straight first. So one thing I might do is add a part number. Okay, I might adjust the quantity, how much it pays for. If I don't know the price on the window pane, like let's say I don't actually know how much this costs. A better example might be nuts and bolts. So my technician described that he wants some nuts and bolts, but he didn't tell me from where or how much they cost. So what I'm going to do, once I associate this with a supplier, I'm going to say, okay, oh, this is a bad example because it's not actually a real part in the system yet. Okay, let's use the window pane again. So if I don't actually know the price for window pane, what I'll do first is request a quote. So the quote will be sent to Ericsson. When I hear back, I can fill in the price details. So let's say it ended up being $14. Okay, there's a few more details displayed on the line. You can see A, where it came from. So Greg manually created this one, compared to this one here, which was created from work order number 1. The other place could come from, again, we mentioned you can have purchase requests generate automatically on a low stock occurrence. So let's say you set up Acme widgets to every time it's below 2 parts, generate a purchase request. Okay, and then here, instead of saying Greg, it would say low stock occurrence or something to that effect. Okay, so there's a few more bits of information available from the planning board. You can see any associated RFQs, the status of those RFQs. So for instance, I've got one here that's been sent but not received yet, and one that hasn't actually been sent. Okay, I can also see any associated accounts or charge departments for the item. All right, so the purchasing manager, I guess, kind of lives here, and as the planning board fills up, he'll turn some of these into purchase orders. So let's say I'm getting ready to make my purchase order with Grainger. I don't want to do them one at a time because that's a lot in shipping. So I'm going to kind of wait until the Grainger backlog gets big enough and say, okay, like 4 is a decent amount to get in one PO. So once I have these 4, I'll simply generate a purchase order for them. The other option is I can add to an existing purchase order. So for instance, that would be an option if I was buying something from Ericsson or even from Sanyo, right? Like both of these have open purchase orders. So I can say, okay, for the joint and the elbow joint, just add these to the existing purchase order I had for Ericsson. For Grainger, however, either I don't have any purchase orders yet for Grainger, or they're already closed, so I can't add any more requests to them. All right, so in this case, I'll take these 4 items and generate a purchase order. Okay, so it's got the 4 items, purchase orders in draft stage, and from here I would go through the workflow we covered at the beginning. Okay, any questions at this point? Again, you can just type them in the chat box. Okay, it doesn't look like it. I'll assume that's a good thing. All right, so the next use case involves RFQs, which we actually touched on kind of briefly. RFQs are used when you don't know the price of the thing you'd like to purchase. Okay, fairly straightforward. There are 3 ways to generate an RFQ. The first is from the purchase request. So let's say you're looking at a request for more nuts and bolts, and you don't know how much they cost. So from there, you fire off a request for a quote to the supplier. Okay. The other way is you can have them generated from a low stock occurrence. So let's say we set up the gear rings that whenever we have less than 2 of these, create a purchase request and also create an RFQ. Okay. You have to do the 2 at the same time. Basically, whenever there's a low stock occurrence, it automatically creates a purchase request. That part isn't really optional. What is optional is you can choose to also create an RFQ. All right, so you run out of gear rings, or you get loaded running out of gear rings, and you trigger A, a purchase request, and B, an RFQ. The third way is you can just do them manually. You can go to the RFQ window and create a new RFQ. All right, from here, so you build in the details of the RFQ. You send it off to the supplier. The supplier hopefully calls or emails you back and says, we do have that in stock. This is how much it costs. And you say, great. And you add those details to the purchase order. Okay, and from there, it kind of continues as we've seen. So really, it's just an intermediary. If you know the price, you can just ignore this section entirely. Just use purchase requests into purchase orders, and so on. If the information about price is unknown, then you might want to use RFQs. All right, so just for simplicity's sake, we'll do the third method, which is just create an RFQ manually. I've got a few here already, and I can filter them by the different draft statuses that they're in. Or sorry, the different workflow statuses that they're in. So right now I'm viewing all of them, but I can also see just show me the RFQs that are sent or just show me the RFQs that have been canceled, right? So I'll create a new RFQ. And just like with purchase orders, the two biggest things are the line items and the supplier you want to send it to. All right, so let's say I want to know about, I don't have a price yet on my CNC machine, which I want to buy another one of. So I want price on 2 of these. Okay, and just like with purchase orders, I can only do one supplier at a time. All right, so I want a request for quote to go out to Ericsson. Okay, there's a few more details I can fill in. The quote number is probably the most important one for most people, but I can also say where I want it shipped to, attach any files. Again, these don't actually get sent with the RFQ, but I can also set when I'd like to hear back and when I ideally want it delivered, okay? And these 2 dates are captured in the email as well. Okay, so once I'm satisfied that the RFQ is built properly, I'll send it off to my supplier. All right, so this one's going to go to Ericsson. It previews the email for me. Again, I have 2 options. I can send the email, which will send the email and change the status, or I can click OK, which will just change the status. All right, so I'll send the email, which fires it off to Ericsson. The RFQ status is changed to sent, and now I kind of wait to hear back. All right, so at some point, hopefully, they get back to me. They say this is how much it costs, and I can mark the quote as being received. Okay, so that changes the status, and then I fill in how much it'll cost. Okay, so $10,000 for 2 of them. Okay, so that's great. So I have my price now for the CNC machine, and what I'll do is I'll say, now that I know that, I can do the same thing with purchase requests, either add it to an open purchase order or generate a new one from scratch. Okay, in this case, for Ericsson at least, I have 1 open purchase order. So I say, that's great, I'll squeeze this into the next purchase I'm going to make with Ericsson. Okay, it shows me the list of all the purchase orders I have. Again, with Ericsson, there's only 1, so I'll select this. And looks good. Okay. So now if I go to the purchase order, there's 1 here from Ericsson. I've got the palletizer. I believe that got lost. I'm not sure what happened to it. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just viewing the open purchase orders before. Okay, so I'm going to try and add that to an open purchase order. And there we go. It populates automatically. Okay, my mistake. Okay, so I added the CNC machine to the purchase order for Ericsson. And as you mentioned, now it's just continuing with the purchase order in the regular workflow. Okay, any questions about RFQs before we close that topic? They work very similarly to purchase requests. Again, it's really just if you don't know the price of something. All right, so the last thing we'll talk about before we get into Q&A is some of the system settings and lookup tables for customizing how purchase orders work. Okay, so you'll notice that I have 7 different statuses that I can move purchase orders through in the system. So it can starts out as a draft, it can go to awaiting approval, finally get approved, get sent, and then go to one of 3 different close statuses. I can fulfill the order, mark it as not fulfilled, or just cancel it. All right. There are, I guess, 5 different controls, or 5 different, I guess, parent categories for this. So closed is its own parent category. And then what the system lets me do is define as many subcategories as I want. So if I want to add a 4th closed status, I can do that. If I want to have 2 different kinds of sent statuses, I can do that as well. Okay, similar to how work order statuses are set up. If I go to my work orders, I've got 3 primary, or I guess 4 different controls. I have active ones, draft, pending, and closed. But beneath that, I can customize as many different statuses as I want. So I can have 5 different closed statuses or 10 different pending ones, really however many I choose. So it's the same thing with purchase orders, only a little more complicated because you have to program how they flow in between each other. Okay, so we'll go down to settings and then across the top here to lookup tables. If I scroll down to the bottom, there's actually 6 new lookup tables added just for purchasing. So these include different RFQ statuses. I mentioned before I can have different cost types. So shipping and tax are the 2 defaults. I can add additional ones here. Different types of shipping, different billing terms, right? Probably the one of most consequence is purchase order statuses. So there's 7 by default. And if I open one up, it's a little more complicated than work order statuses, which just have the name and control. If I scroll up to work order statuses, where are they here? If I want to create a new work order status, literally the only thing I need to fill in is what do I want to call the work order status and what control do I want it to have. Okay, it's a little more complicated if I scroll down to purchase order statuses. I open up draft, for instance. So not only do I have to define the name and the control I want, but I also have to define every status that it can go to. So I'm just going to go to a draft purchase order here. Okay. So I'm looking at my purchase order for Ericsson here, and the current status it's in is draft, which gives me 3 options. I can submit it for approval, I can send it to supplier, or I can cancel it. And that's because of the way that the status is defined. Okay, the 3 options that are checked off for the draft status is you can send it to waiting for approval, you can set it to on order, or you can set it to canceled. Okay, likewise, just one more example, if I send this to supplier, okay, now it's in on order. And from here, I only have 3 options. I can set it as fulfilled, not fulfilled, or canceled. If for whatever reason I wanted to change the workflow and say from here I also want to be able to send it to draft, I can make that change, no problem. Just click OK. Okay, I'm just going to reload number 20. Okay, and now in addition to these 3 statuses, I also have the ability to set it back to draft. Okay, so I think the logic works kind of how you'd expect it to. The main reason I point this out is it can get a little tricky to add in new statuses or to define a custom workflow because you have to be thorough. You can't, like, let's say you want it to go from draft to your custom status to closed. So you say, okay, I'm going to create my new custom status. Okay, which is in awaiting approval. And from here, I want it to go into just order fulfilled. So I say great. However, I forgot that I also needed to come from draft. So I need to go into draft as well and say, okay, from draft, it goes into new status, or you have the option of sending it into the new status. Right? So it's not that difficult to manage, but mistakes can be made. Okay, so that more or less covers all the basic details of purchase orders.